Today, follow it live here on C-SPAN. That speech and all of our coverage available at cspan.org. We'll take you back live. We're on Capitol Hill for the gathering of the Council for Christian Colleges and Universities. About to hear from House Speaker Nancy Pelosi.
For your introduction, and thank you for the invitation to be here. I'm pleased to welcome all of you to Capitol Hill. So many of you familiar faces back to Capitol Hill. Certainly among them, Galen Carey. Thank you, Galen, for your leadership, being such a wonderful representative of the values of the evangelical community. And here today, our young people, Christian colleges and universities. Shirley, CCCU, Shirley, thank you for your leadership as president. My apologies for running late. Votes on the floor. I don't know who's charged there, but whatever it was, it didn't. The votes came sooner than expected and prevented me from being here from the start. But I truly do welcome you here. I believe that faith is so much the support, not only the aspiration for many of us, but the support that gives people hope. From time to time, people say to me, "Where is hope?" I said, hope is where it always has been, sitting right there between faith and charity. Faith, hope, and charity. Because people have faith, and they believe in God, they believe in themselves, they believe in the goodness of others, the charity of others, it gives them hope. So faith is the strength, has always been the strength of our country. And it is also a country full of love. I believe America's heart is full of love, that the American people care about each other and believe, as many of us do, certainly all of this room, that we're all God's children. There's a spark of divinity that exists inside of each of us. Our immigrants at the border, in each of us, and including ourselves. And we have an obligation to treat people with respect, but we have a responsibility with that spark of our own to act upon it. When people talk about the Gospel of Matthew as being an inspiration to so many of us, when I was hungry, you fed me. When I was naked, you clothed me. When I was homeless, you sheltered me. When I was in prison, you visited me. I always want to remind them that the rest of that gospel is the converse. When I was hungry, you didn't feed me. See, because at that day, God separates the people. When I was hungry, you fed me. When I was hungry, you didn't feed me. When I was homeless, you didn't shelter me. And that second part of it, I think, is very important for us all to remember, because the responsibility, the challenge is there, both to respond positively, but not to respond negatively. And I can't find it in the Bible, but I quote it all the time, and I keep reading and reading the Bible. I know it's there someplace. It's supposed to be in Isaiah, but I heard a bishop say, to minister to the needs of God's creation is an act of worship. To ignore those needs is to dishonor the God who made us. It's there somewhere in some words or another, but certainly the spirit of it is there, and that we all have a responsibility to act upon our beliefs in the dignity and worth of every person. Now, of course, I've worked with some of you in this room over time on the immigration issue, and the evangelical community has been in the lead on it for a long, long time, really being there for so many strong initiatives for comprehensive immigration reform, respecting the dignity and worth of every person. And I will thank you and thank Galen for his beautiful testimony when he came right around the time of the Muslim ban, and we had diplomats coming in and saying this is harmful. We had the military coming in saying this is harmful. We had people of faith coming in and saying how inappropriate it was to single out one faith for discrimination. And Galen came, and he said to us, and Galen will correct me if I miss a word or so here, he said that the refugee resettlement program of the United States is the crown jewel of America's humanitarianism. Is that right, Galen? I'd quote you all the time, because this is really true. And what we're talking about with people seeking amnesty, refugee status for fear of, well-founded fear of persecution, it is an obligation of our country to be responsive to that. Other countries are, and we do a minimum, and it's just not right. So in the current challenge that we have, one of the things that we've had to convey to the administration is that these people do have a right under international law and any sense of decency to seek refuge in our country. And we have a responsibility to question whether it is a well-founded fear of persecution. But it isn't against the law for them to come into America to have that test made. A large number of the people come through the ports of entry, overwhelmingly. But if they were to cross the border in another place because they are fleeing danger, that's okay too. And then they are subjected to the test of whether they meet that standard. So one of the things we're hoping to do in our negotiations now, since this is when you're here, and 1:30 today they will go into conference, and we're hoping that we can find common ground as soon as possible so that we can not only meet our responsibility to protect our border, to treat people coming here with dignity and respect, but also to keep government open. Some of the things that we have in there I think will be very acceptable. It goes on both sides of the ledger. We both care, all of us on either side of the wall question, but all care about treating the people who come. And so there'll be sizable funding for food, clothing, medical care for immigrants coming across the border, so we don't have people dying in our custody, children. There'll be sizable funding for additional judges to more quickly adjudicate these cases so that it doesn't become, well, they're here such a long time. Well, it's because we have such a backlog, too. So we'd have that. There'll be funding to send money to the countries where most of these people are coming from, the Northern Triangle, to try to alleviate some of the conditions that have exacerbated the situation there, to mitigate for the horror that some of them face. And we have to see how that money is spent, but a recognition of that if we can solve some of the problems at home, then people can stay home. They come here because they have no choice. It's just a matter of life or death or danger for their families. So, and there are other areas where we can find common ground, but those three are very personal in terms of the adjudication of the case, the care and feeding of them coming, and try to help them stay at home. So I always like to place us in time. You come at a time that is very interesting, and again, the respect and dignity that the evangelical community has always attributed to newcomers to our country. It might be interesting to you that the president that I quoted most on the campaign trail was Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan said this. Imagine that, almost as memorable as Galen's statement that day to our committee. He said, "This is the last speech I will make as President of the United States." Does that get your attention, Ronald Reagan? This is the last speech? Oh, you're all too young. "This is the last speech I will make as President of the United States." And he talked about the Statue of Liberty and what it meant to families to look there and say, that's what my parents, my grandparents, my ancestors saw when they came to America. And there she is. And what it means to newcomers still coming to America to see this beacon of hope to the world, of welcome to newcomers to America. And then he goes on to say, you have to read the speech directly because I most certainly will not do it justice. But then he goes on to say, the vital force, America must recognize that the vital force of our preeminence in the world is every new generation of new immigrants coming to our country. And once America fails to recognize their contribution, we will fail to be preeminent in the world. Ronald Reagan, recognizing the vitality, the optimism, the hope, the courage, the determination to make the future better for their children and the next generations. And those are American traits. Those people, all of our ancestors, parents, grandparents, maybe some of you in the room, make America more American with that optimism, hope, courage, and determination. He goes on to say we must not close doors. So you really have to read his speech. It's just remarkable. And he, George Herbert Walker Bush, President George Herbert Walker Bush, President Clinton, President George W. Bush, in his heart and his head, was all there with immigration, but we just couldn't convince others in his party at that time. But he really was maybe the best in terms of his full appreciation personally as a representative and as a governor of a border state, and of course Barack Obama. And so this administration is really a departure from the bipartisanship that has always existed, the recognition of who we are, by and large, a nation of immigrants, unless we are blessed to have been born into a Native American family, which is a blessing as well. So we have important decisions to make relative to the dignity and worth of every person and who we are as a country acting upon our beliefs. I'll just close by saying, when I think of all of you, I think of one time I was someplace and somebody said, "What is your favorite word?" What is your favorite word? What is your favorite word? And it was kind of not a particularly religious group, but I said to them, my favorite word is the Word. The Word. And the Word was made Christ. That's my favorite word, because I think of all that implies. And whatever your beliefs, I say to those, I know yours, but with those, I say whatever your beliefs in life after death or whatever, or, eternity and the rest, if you don't share the view that many of us have about eternity, then at least recognize the Word was made Christ, and Christ is our Savior, and his example is such a blessing to the world. So thank you for being people of faith, recognizing personally what it means to you, but what it means to the strength of our country. I'm so honored that you're here. Welcome. Thank you for your friendship. Thank you for your leadership. Thank you so much, Shirley, again, for your hospitality.
Speaker Pelosi, we thank you for the reference for Matthew 25. This is something that's near and dear to us. We're grateful for your heart for the immigrant, and we're grateful for your service, a long service, and we believe in the two-party system, and we're glad you're here with us. And Gail and Carrie, your friend, is going to pray for you, because wisdom is something that we all want, and we know it comes from God.
That's beautiful.
Let us pray together. Gracious God, you have brought leaders to our nation to guide us into justice and righteousness. And we pray right now for your guidance for Speaker Pelosi as she leads the House of Representatives. We pray as well for the other leaders in the Congress and President Trump as they meet together to negotiate even in the next days. May they have your guidance to come to resolution that is good for our nation, and especially to our nation's history of welcome to immigrants and refugees. We pray for those who are right now seeking refuge. May you meet their needs, and may you provide for them the solution that you have for them. As we go now to meet with our representatives and our senators, guide us. May we be articulate advocates for your heart for those in need. As we receive refreshment and lunch and other things, may you also provide for those who right now are without those basic necessities. All these things we pray in the name of our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you
Yeah.
so much.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank
Very
you to the
helpful.
speaker. We've had an impactful morning, and now I know that you're going to gather up with your students. We've already prayed for the next section. Our next time together is a spouses program at 4 o'clock back at Capitol Hill, Washington Court Hotel. And then at 6 o'clock, we have our reception, and at 7 o'clock, we have a wonderful banquet. So thank you all. Blessings on your Hill visits, and Godspeed.
Have a great day.
From the very same speech.
She's like, next slide, next slide, next slide.
These clubs, I can't possibly lose them. They're mismatched. They'll stay with me forever.
Well, the U.S. Senate gavels in at noon Eastern today. Senate lawmakers will continue working on a Middle East security bill, which includes new sanctions against Syria and U.S. military assistance to Israel. Senators will debate an amendment offered by Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell disapproving the withdrawal of U.S. forces from Syria and Afghanistan. Follow live coverage of the Senate here on C-SPAN 2. And this afternoon, House and Senate lawmakers appointed to the Conference Committee on Border Security will meet to try and reach an agreement on spending for the Homeland Security Department, which would include border security funding. Watch live coverage beginning at 1:30 p.m. Eastern on our companion network C-SPAN 3. Live Super Bowl Sunday at noon Eastern. Author and sports writer Dave Zirin is our guest on Book TV's In Depth. Author of many books, including What's My Name, Fool?, A People's History of Sports in the United States, Game Over, How Politics Has Turned the Sports World Upside Down, and his most recent, Jim Brown, Last Man Standing.
Now, I love sports, and that's why I think we need to fight for sports. We need to actually reclaim them. We need to take sports back. And if we're going to do so, what we need to know our history. That's our greatest ammunition in this fight. We need to know our history of the athletes, the sports writers, and the fans who have stood up to the machine. If for no other reason than knowing this history, I think allows us to look at the world and see that struggle can affect every aspect of life in this system, even the swoosh-adorned ivory tower known as sports.
Join our live 3-hour conversation with Dave Zirin with your calls, emails, tweets, and Facebook questions live Sunday at noon Eastern on Book TV's In Depth on C-SPAN 2. Sunday on Q&A. The case that brought down Vice President Spiro Agnew in 1973 with prosecuting attorneys Ron Liebman and Tim Baker.
We believe that we could indict the Vice President. We believe that he was not immune from prosecution while in office. And in fact, his lawyers, among the defensive positions they took was that he couldn't be prosecuted, that he was cloaked with immunity. Agnew didn't want to go to jail, and he had this get-out-of-jail-free card. What was that? This is Watergate. Richard Nixon was a walking dead man, politically speaking. It was only a matter of time, most everybody understood, before he would be forced out of office. That would make Spiro Agnew, this vice president who we have under investigation, president. Can you imagine how the country would react? President Nixon, a crook, leaves office. Vice President Agnew, a crook, becomes president.
Sunday night at 8 Eastern on C-SPAN's Q&A. President Trump's pick to head the Federal Highway Administration, Nicole Nason, testified yesterday at a confirmation hearing on Capitol Hill. She previously served as the head of the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration during the George W. Bush administration. She was introduced by former Transportation Secretary Norman Mineta at the Senate Environment and Public Works Committee hearing.
The nomination of Nicole Nason to be the administrator of the Federal Highway Administration at the United States Department of Transportation. She is well qualified for this important post. She brings impressive, meaningful experience in federal transportation policy to this critically important position. I applaud President Trump's nomination of such an accomplished and dedicated public servant. The Federal Highway Administration plays a central role in American mobility. The administration is the lead federal partner to the state and local transportation programs that maintain and improve our nation's roads, highways, and bridges. America's transportation infrastructure faces a lot of challenges. For far too long, the Federal Highway Administration has been without Senate-confirmed leadership. Moreover, the authorization of the federal highway programs will expire in September of next year. The Congressional Budget Office projects that the Highway Trust Fund will become insolvent sometime in 2021. That's why we must work together in this committee to write and pass a bipartisan highway bill that upgrades America's roads and bridges in a fiscally responsible manner, and do it in this Congress. We successfully worked together to pass comprehensive bipartisan water infrastructure legislation. Now let's come together to fix our highways, roads, and bridges. This legislation must address the needs of rural America as well as urban America. Rural roads are vital to bringing raw materials and products from the heartland to urban centers. Federal highways like I-80 run coast to coast, bringing goods and services across America. This includes the stretch of I-80 in my home state of Wyoming. We must maintain and improve these highways in rural states that keep these vital arteries of commerce open. In addition, I strongly support the federal highway program's current reliance on distributing funds by formula to the states. This is the best way to ensure that funding is transformed into projects quickly. The Federal Highway Administration will need a strong administrator to work with Congress on the deployment, development, and implementation of highway infrastructure legislation. Nicole Nason is the right person for the job. During the Bush administration, she served as administrator of the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, the Department of Transportation's top road safety official. Prior to this role, she served as the Department of Transportation's Assistant Secretary of Government Affairs and played a key role in negotiating the bipartisan passage of a 5-year surface transportation reauthorization bill. She currently serves as Assistant Secretary of the United States Department of State's Bureau of Administration, where she manages nearly 2,000 employees and contractors. She has won praise from a wide variety of groups. Helen Whitty, the National President of Mothers Against Drunk Driving, stated, "Nicole is a true champion of highway safety and will be an asset to the Department of Transportation as the Federal Highway Administration Administrator. On behalf of MAD, I wholeheartedly endorse her for this position." The Associated General Contractors of America said that she is a superb choice to fulfill the Federal Highway Administration's leadership role in improving mobility on our nation's highways. As such, the Associated General Contractors urges the Senate to quickly confirm her nomination. The Governor's Highway Safety Association said throughout her career, Ms. Nason has demonstrated a clear commitment to public service, and during her tenure as administrator of the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, a dedication to advancing highway safety. Confirming her to be administrator of the Federal Highway Administration will be an important step in supporting our nation's highways, roads, and bridges. I urge all of my colleagues to work with me to get this done, and will now turn to the ranking member for his statement, Senator Carper.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's my intent to place a hold on the nomination of Ms. No, it's not really. Who are those old people sitting next to you? Are those your kids? Yeah. How are you guys? Tell us your names. No, the first. No, on the right. First. Yeah. Hi, Abby. Hi. Okay. And who's the big guy? Thank you for your willingness.
I thought you were the big guy.
No. I think I want to thank you guys for your willingness to share this woman with the rest of us. And it's that her nomination to the fight, the battle ahead for her confirmation will be hard fought, but I've got a hunch she'll kind of squeak through. We'll see. It depends on how she does today. But Ms. Mason, we want to thank you. I just want to say to Norman that it's great to see Norman. Many of us were privileged to serve with Norm in the House of Representatives years ago, and as the Secretary of the Interior, Secretary of Transportation, God only knows what else he's got. He is warmly loved in Delaware and on Delmarva, and by the horseshoe crab population of our region. There's a sanctuary that was created, and he had a big role in doing that to save the horseshoe crabs, which have been around for hundreds of millions of years, as it turns out. But Ms. Nason, thank you for appearing before our committee this morning. We welcome you and your family here today, and we welcome your nomination to lead the Federal Highway Administration. As my colleagues will recall, you're not the first person nominated by this administration for this job. And the fellow who'd been from Iowa, a DOT director of Transportation Director there, Paul Trombino, withdrew his name as a nominee because of the illness of his father. And he wanted to spend the last weeks and months with his dad. And he passed on this job in order to be able to do that. And his misfortune, his family's misfortune, has opened up this opportunity for you. And it's interesting, when I was talking with you yesterday, and you spoke about your own father and the impact that his life, his misfortune, actually, with that terrible motorcycle accident, sort of helped guide you in the end to safety and vehicular safety, and brings you before us today. But it's now been more than 2 years since we've had an administrator, the longest gap in leadership of this agency, I think, in more than 100 years, which is long before our nation's interstate highway system even came into existence. Back when the Federal Highway Administration was known as the Bureau of Public Roads. I've long said that leadership is the key to the success of any organization. We've heard many times over the last 2 years that the Trump administration is eager to enact major infrastructure legislation and make significant investments in rebuilding our country's roads, highways, bridges, our transit systems. And with that in mind, in my view, it is counterintuitive to have left vacant for such a long period of time this important leadership role in the Federal Highway Administration, an agency that's critical in our infrastructure mission. But I hope that your nomination, the President's nomination of you, Ms. Mason, to be administrator of Federal Highway Administration is both evidence that the Trump administration is aware of these organizational needs, and also a signal that the administration is ready to work with Congress on reauthorizing our nation's transportation systems. The Federal Highway Administration is the lead federal agency that oversees more than 220,000 miles of our national highway system and some 145,000 bridges. Today, far too many of those roadways and bridges have been in use well beyond their original design and are in, as we know, poor condition. Too many drivers, pedestrians, and bicyclists put their lives at risk when they use our roadways. And in 2017, just 2 years ago, there were more than 37,000 fatalities on our nation's roadways. And for context, that's approximately the same number as the number of lives lost annually in our country to gun violence. Too many Americans also lack access to reliable transit or safe places to walk or bike, or to charging stations for electric vehicles or fueling stations for hydrogen vehicles. That means the many people in our country who would like to reduce the carbon footprint may not have as many options as they would otherwise have. Next year, the FAST Act, which provided 5 years of funding and policy certainty for our transportation sector, is set to expire. Congress must work now on reauthorizing our federal service transportation programs so that we can provide continued certainty for states, for tribal communities, for cities, and while also addressing the opportunities and challenges facing our transportation sector today and in the years to come. We have a rapidly evolving transportation industry in which new tools, data, and technology are disrupting traditional practices of planning, of building, of operating, and using road infrastructure. As we know, our climate is changing. Our vehicles and traffic patterns accelerate and exacerbate that change, while at the same time increasingly extreme weather events and sea level rise wear down our transportation networks. In addition to these major policy concerns, we face another big problem. Our Highway Trust Fund is going broke. Last year, we spent almost $13 billion more from the Highway Trust Fund than we collected in revenues. I'll say that again. Last year, we spent almost $13 billion more from the Highway Trust Fund than we collected in revenues. Next year, that deficit will be even greater. To pay for the FAST Act and for surface transportation, we took $70 billion from our general fund and other programs. At a time when our federal budget deficit last year reached $750 billion, I believe we're on target to reach, in our federal deficit for this year, $850 billion, and maybe next year as much as $1 trillion. For the next five-year transportation bill, we will need to find an additional $85 billion just to keep our program at current funding levels. Despite spending more than we collect, we still aren't even spending enough. The backlog of money needed to rehabilitate and improve highways and bridges has grown to $800 billion. Think about that, $800 billion backlog. And while we're thinking about that, let me conclude by saying that I hope Ms. Nason will prove to be a true partner to those of us here in Congress, one who will work with us from day one to address these challenges that I've just mentioned and other challenges in the months and the years ahead. These challenges are great, but so are the opportunities. And I'm hopeful that Ms. Nason will prove to be the leader who's needed right now to find opportunity in adversity so we can seize the day. Thank you. Welcome.
Well, thank you very much, Senator Carper. We have now a really special privilege at this committee to hear from one of the greats in American politics and history. Norm Mineta is here, former Secretary of Transportation, 20 years in the House, Chairman of the Transportation Committee in the House, then was Secretary of Commerce for Bill Clinton, Secretary of Transportation for George W. Bush. But if you Google him, what you come up and you get Norm Mineta and it says, "and Al Simpson." There is no way to avoid this linkage that began over 7 decades ago as Boy Scouts in Cody, Wyoming, written about recently in the Washington Post and CBS News with a wonderful story about you and your legacy and the friendship and our kinship with Wyoming. But we're just so privileged to have you joining us today. So with this, I would like to ask you, Mr. Secretary, to please proceed.
Mr. Chairman,
Senator.
Could I also just voice the fact that I'm so pleased to see you today and just thank you for your service. You were so helpful to me when I was in the House, and you were Secretary of Transportation even before that, and gave me great advice, and I think truly are a model for what this place should be all about, working with both sides, trying to get a result. The Secretary and one of my mentors, John Paul Hammerschmidt, were great friends. And again, thank you for your service, and thank you for helping so many of us in so many different ways. We appreciate you.
Thank you. Mr. Secretary.
Chairman, Ranking Member Clark, senators of the committee. I thank you for the honor of appearing before you this morning and permitting me to address you. It is a pleasure to see so many senators and former colleagues with whom I've had the pleasure to work over the years. Thank you for this honor and privilege to speak on behalf of Nicole R. Nason, the nominee for Federal Highway Administrator. I have known Nicole since 2003, when she came to the Department of Transportation to serve as our Assistant Secretary of Government Affairs. And as Secretary of Transportation, I met with Nicole nearly every day to discuss legislative proposals, and strategies. However, her counsel went far beyond legislative issues. She was a key member of my executive team and was one of the department's liaisons with the White House and the Office of Management and Budget. Now, after 3 years as the Assistant Secretary, I recommended to President George W. Bush that she be nominated as DOT's National Highway Traffic Safety Administrator. She was unanimously confirmed by the Senate and served until 2008 as NHTSA Administrator. She successfully implemented numerous safety mandates and reporting requirements by Safety Lou. And during Nicole's tenure as NHTSA's administrator, significant rulemaking were completed, including electronic stability control, side impact priorities protection, and improvement in roof strength, all because of her leadership skills. Now, she also instituted a series of public meetings addressing topics such as the new car assessment program, school bus safety, child safety seats, and use of ignition interlock devices. And many of these proposals originated from these meetings were later enacted by the agency. I also turned to Nicole to represent the department and me internationally. She spoke at the United Nations in Geneva on international harmonization and safety regulations. She conducted an important bilateral with the Chinese government to prevent the sale of fraudulently made automobile tires. Nicole is an accomplished government executive, excuse me, an experienced transportation leader, and an individual with a high degree of personal integrity and character. Frankly, though, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, there are several people that Nicole could have had appear before you and attest to her record and the proven attributes of her character. I responded very quickly to Nicole to appear on her behalf because I believe Nicole's nomination is, excuse me, an important opportunity for this Senate and this nation. Because of the convergence of certain factors, Nicole's nomination transcends the usual confirmation of one more sub-cabinet executive. As this committee so well knows, I served in Congress for over 20 years. As recited by the chairman, I was the Secretary of Commerce for a Democratic president and the Secretary of Transportation for a Republican president. In all three of these positions, the key to any success that I had was persistent advocacy and seeking bipartisan collaboration whenever and wherever I could find it. This committee has done remarkable work with those tools and succeeded where others could not. Last year, your outstanding bipartisan work regarding our nation's water infrastructure was a true public policy achievement benefiting every American. As you know, our nation's transportation infrastructure faces similar challenges. And at a time where bipartisanship can be a scarce commodity, I believe this committee has the opportunity to once again revive this essential practice of governance. As many experts and pundits have indicated, infrastructure legislation is one of the best opportunities where this can occur. Having Nicole R. Nason at Federal Highway Administration will assist the committee and this Congress in achieving this national need. She will strive to find common ground on a bipartisan basis on which to achieve needed solutions. She will be relentless in seeking opportunities and in the critical work Federal Highway Administration will perform in working with you. She is the right person at the right time for this position, and I know she will not let you down. Mr. Chairman, because of that, I am grateful to Nicole for allowing me to appear before you and this committee to speak in support of her candidacy as Federal Highway Administrator. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I would be very pleased to answer any questions senators may have with respect to her nomination.
Well, thank you so very much, Mr. Secretary. As you'd said, others could have appeared here to introduce her, but certainly in the opinion of the chair and the entire committee, none more distinguished and none more welcome than you. So we are delighted to have you. We're welcome to stay through the rest of the hearing. The chair nor the committee have any questions for you, but just to wish you very well, and you're always welcome to join us at this committee. Thank you so much, Mr. Secretary.
Norm, Mr. Secretary, before you leave, I leaned over while you were speaking. I said to the chairman, I said, you know, this administration would be smart to contract with you to come and speak and introduce a lot of nominees. Probably have more success than anything else I can think of. Great to see you, my friend. Thanks. God bless you.
Well, now we'd like to welcome to the committee our nominee, Nicole Nason, who is the nominee to be the administrator of the Federal Highway Administration. We're delighted to have you, and congratulations on your nomination. I want to remind you that your full written testimony will be made part of the record. We look forward to hearing your testimony today, and I know you have members of the family here. If you'd like to introduce them, do additional introductions, and then when you're finished, please proceed with your testimony. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Got it.
Ranking Member Carper, members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today to be considered for the position of Administrator of the Federal Highway Administration at the Department of Transportation. If confirmed, I look forward to working with you to enable and empower the strengthening of a world-class highway system. I would like to thank President Trump and Secretary Chao for their confidence in my ability to serve in this critical role. And I would also like to express my gratitude to Secretary Norman Mineta, not just for his appearance and his remarks today, but for his years of extraordinary service to our country. His life story is incredible, and he remains one of my personal heroes. I'm pleased to have with me today my husband, David. I know you met them briefly, but my son, Brady, age 10, and my daughter, Abby, age 14, and my daughter, Alex, age 17. I am grateful for their love and support always, although I recognize that they get to miss school today for this, but I'd like to think they'd come even on a Saturday. Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Carper, as you are aware, I am currently serving as the Assistant Secretary for Administration at the State Department. My 1,900-plus employees and contractors at the A Bureau manage everything from logistics and shipping to building repairs to all departmental procurement. I love my position, but my heart is in transportation policy. And that is why I was so excited and privileged when President Trump and Secretary Chao invited me to return to my roots at the Department of Transportation as the Federal Highway Administrator. If confirmed, my first priority will be Secretary Chao's first priority, the safety of our transportation system. This focus unites the department across the modes and will remain top of mind for me always. Having served as administrator of the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration and having spent several years on the National Board of Directors of Mothers Against Drunk Driving, I know the grim statistics all too well. In 2017, as the Senator noted, there were 37,133 people killed in motor vehicle crashes. This is an appalling number, and I believe the only acceptable number is 0. If confirmed, I hope to focus particularly on pedestrian safety. I would like to work with state and local leaders and members of this body to improve pedestrian and cyclist safety by focusing on improved road design and targeting our most dangerous intersections. Secondly, if confirmed, I intend to work closely with my fellow administrators and colleagues at the DOT. I believe if we are to respond to our serious transportation challenges effectively, we need to work seamlessly. I intend to collaborate with my federal colleagues in Washington, D.C., and all of our state, local, and tribal government partners to eliminate barriers to project delivery and timely success. For example, many new technologies cut across several modes, and I will work with all of our partners on the development and safe integration of these technologies. Third, if I am confirmed, I intend to visit our teams in the field. I would like to go out and meet with state and local and tribal partners to see their concerns and hear their ideas personally. I learned while serving as NHTSA administrator that's important to get out of D.C. and understand the challenges firsthand. Finally, I am aware of the role FHWA will play in the reauthorization of surface transportation legislation, as the Fixing America's Surface Transportation Act will expire at the end of fiscal year 2020. I was proud to play a part in helping shape SAFE-T-LU when I previously served at the department, and I look forward to the prospect of working together on any legislative efforts. As this committee knows well, there is not a one-size-fits-all solution. Mr. Chairman, as the daughter of a New York County motorcycle highway patrol officer, I grew up hearing about highway and vehicle safety. I clearly remember Dad's gruesome motorcycle crash while on the job and his extended recovery at home. His helmet with the crack in the back where his head smacked the pavement and knocked him unconscious was his gift to me when I was confirmed as NHTSA administrator. If confirmed as FHWA administrator, I will proudly display the helmet in that office as well. The helmet was his reminder that there is a person and a family behind all the statistics. A reminder that we can and should always strive to do more. Again, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Carper, thank you for allowing me to appear before you today. If confirmed, I commit to you that I will perform the role of FHWA Administrator with accountability to all stakeholders, especially the American public, and I would be happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you for the incredible story of your father's commitment and service to the people of New York and the people of this country, and to your continuing this legacy and concern. And we're grateful that you're willing to take this responsibility. And there are a couple of questions that you'll get from members here. We ask that you answer those. They'll also have maybe some written questions afterwards. I hope you would respond to the hearing, to the questions throughout the hearing, and respond to the questions afterwards for the record. But there are a couple of questions I have to ask, as we ask all nominees on behalf of the committee. Do you agree, if confirmed, to appear before this committee or designated members of the committee and other appropriate committees of the Congress and provide information subject to appropriate and necessary security protection with respect to your responsibilities?
Yes, sir.
And do you agree to ensure that testimony, briefings, documents, and electronic and other forms of information are provided to this committee and its staff and other appropriate committees in a timely manner?
Yes.
And do you know of any matters which you may or may not have disclosed that might place you in any conflict of interest if you are confirmed?
No, Mr. Chairman.
Well, then let me start with some questions. You, as we mentioned, previously served as the Administrator, National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, confirmed by the Senate. During your tenure as Administrator, what did you learn regarding the need for federal policymakers to account for differences in priorities and circumstances among rural versus urban states? Obviously, being from a rural area, the others are out, and how you deal with that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. At NHTSA, during my tenure at NHTSA, we were very clear that there are unique needs of rural states and even rural communities. My own state of New York, we always like to say not all of New York is Manhattan. And so there are unique needs where I grew up, infrastructure failings, aging roads, egress concerns, which compared to the challenges of New York City, congestion and other quality of life issues. But so we tend to focus our messaging on a rural versus urban center because they have different transportation concerns, they have different safety concerns. Tribal governments have different safety concerns, and there's one thing we learned at NHTSA, and we had a very specific example of advertisements that we were running. And we learned that you can't take the same commercial, no matter how much time and money you may have spent into producing and packaging it, and expect it to have the same impact around the country. It won't. You have to know the specific challenges of those communities, and so that's something that I think I could bring to FHWA if I'm confirmed.
And if confirmed, can we be assured that you will work diligently to make sure that the Federal Highway Administration is sensitive to the concerns of rural states like Wyoming?
Yes, of course.
You know, many states and others have appeared before this committee strongly supporting the distribution of highway funds by the formula that we've set up. They've told us that adequate formula funding is important because it provides the flexibility needed to plan effectively, and it enables states to put funds to work faster, which is a key issue for the states. Do you agree that the existing formula programs do enable states to address their priorities maybe more effectively and more expeditiously than trying to create new programs that are less well understood and can take time to establish?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you. I think from what I have heard in speaking with our partners, from my experience at the State Department with construction of embassies and consulates, what's most critical is the certainty in the funding stream. And I think that's something that, if I am confirmed, I would be happy to work with you and the members of the committee to make sure that states can plan, which I think is most essential.
You would also likely agree that there's unanimous consensus that transportation projects often take too long to complete, and that we need to work together to find ways to further streamline the process while still protecting the environment. We've heard testimony before this committee that suggests one of the reasons that projects are significantly slowed down is too many agencies required to take action to approve a single project. And instead of being done concurrently, they're done consecutively. You have to wait for one and then another and another. So how important is streamlining to timely project delivery, and how can we best achieve it?
Yes, I think streamlining, as you note, is essential for helping to resolve and make improvements more quickly. Having served as the NHTSA administrator at a time when we were raising CAFE standards for the first time in many, many years, I can tell you it's a challenge even internally to bring everyone to the table and resolve interagency concerns. So I think that is a role where FHWA can be quite helpful. And if I am confirmed as FHWA administrator, that is leadership responsibility that I would like to take on.
And we tend to be amazed at the power of innovation, vehicles coming onto the market right now that keep drivers from leaving their lanes, even hit the brakes in an emergency. Within the next decade, I think we're likely to see even greater advances in connected and autonomous vehicles. The innovations that have the potential to provide significant safety and efficiency benefits, I think, to the traveling public. We had a discussion last night where people said, will I ever actually want to buy another car, or will I just use a ride-sharing service for people that are living in major cities? You know, what role should the Federal Highway Administration play in preparing our roadways and our communities, both rural and urban, for the arrival of these new technologies?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think, as I noted in my opening statement, I think it's going to be very important for modal administrators, all modal administrators at the Department of Transportation, to work together and to share research and best data, because many of these technologies cut across the modes. They impact NHTSA, but also federal motor carriers and also federal highways. So if I'm confirmed as Federal Highways Administrator, I will work closely with my colleagues to make sure that we are providing the best data and information to all of our partners.
Well, thank you and congratulations again.
Senator
Carper.
Actually, I'd like to, in a minute, follow up on the Chairman's question with respect to environmental streamlining. I'd like to talk a little bit about the federal-state partnership as a recovering governor.
Yep.
I'd like to dwell a little bit on safety. But I want to start off with climate change.
Okay.
And my neighbor here to my left, Delmarva buddy, Senator Cardin, and we have another Maryland senator here, Chris Van Hollen, who'll join us later, I suspect. But we live in an area where, like, the land is sinking and the seas are rising. And in fact, Delaware is the lowest lying state in America. And it's a great concern to us. We have a son out in California, and just north of where he lives, they had these incredible wildfires up in Oregon, Washington, Montana, actually bigger than Delaware, if you can believe that. Ellicott City, where Senator Cardin, Senator Van Hollen represent, they had, as I recall, 2 500-year floods, 2,000-year floods within 20 months of each other. And some people think that, climate change is not real, it's esoteric. It is real, and we see it every day. And our transportation system is a major source of greenhouse gas emissions. In fact, the greatest source of carbon is from our vehicles, as it turns out today. And our transportation system is highly vulnerable to impact from extreme weather. And according to the National Climate Assessment Report released by 13 federal agencies across the Trump administration, this is a quote, this is what they said: expected increases in the severity and frequency of heavy precipitation events will affect inland infrastructure in every region, including access to roads, the viability of bridges, and the safety of pipelines. For my whole life, we have measured rainfall by inches. Now, we measure rainfall in some instances by the foot. As the Federal Highway Administrator, you're going to have an opportunity to influence roadway design and the availability of vehicle charging infrastructure and fueling infrastructure, and space for safe walking and for safe bicycling. How will you use your leadership to address how our vehicles and travel patterns accelerate and exacerbate climate change? And how would you propose to ensure that infrastructure is resilient to extreme weather?
Yes, thank you, Senator Carper. I wrote down when you said our roads are vulnerable to extreme weather. And having grown up on the very east end of Long Island, we lived through hurricanes regularly, and our roads would flood, and then there's no egress, and often there's no second egress because it was a ferry, and that's not an option either. And I've spent my life watching my father as a first responder go out in extreme weather and help respond to these challenges, particularly on our roads when people's instinct is to get in a car and try to drive away, and then they're trapped. So I am very interested in seeing what the Federal Highway Administration can do to improve resiliency in our transportation system as a whole. I think there's a lot of good research and data that FHWA can provide to state and local governments, and a leadership role that FHWA can play. And if confirmed, I would be happy to work with you on those issues.
Let's talk a little bit more about the environmental streamlining. The chairman touched on it. This administration finally appointed filled a number of key positions within the administration that deal with streamlining. For the first, I would say, almost year and a half of this administration, some of the major people that are responsible for dealing with streamlining and working to facilitate the building of roads, highways, bridges, that those positions were not filled. And I'm told by my staff that as of the beginning of this year, most of them have been filled. And one of the greatest holdups in moving projects has been the lack of the people in the right position. So I think that's been dealt with. That's good. But this committee has provided numerous streamlining measures in both MAP 21 in 2012 and in the FAST Act, are two major transportation reauthorization bills. The latter was in 2015. Many of these new authorities were only just finalized in Federal Highway Administration regulations just a couple of months ago, as you may know. If you are confirmed, will you commit to providing our committee with updates on how these streamlining measures are having an impact on project timelines, and to inform us of how the FHWA is ensuring that environmental outcomes are being protected and improved?
Yes, Senator Carper, I know there were many new interesting proposals in MAP 21 and FAST for environmental streamlining that FHWA is working to administer, and if I'm confirmed, will provide you with an update.
Yeah. I'll just say this and close. Sounds like we've got the right people in place within this administration now to do a better job on environmental streamlining. We have spent a lot of time and energy and effort in this committee in the last half dozen years or more writing legislation focused on environmental streamlining, and we need to find out what's working. And we're going to count on you to tell us what's working and maybe what isn't. All right. Thanks very much.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Senator Capito.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Secretary Mineta. It's nice to see you again. I want to thank you for your willingness to serve the public, and your career at NHTSA and also at the State Department demonstrates that you are unquestionably qualified for the position. And I would like to thank your daughter, Alex, for her great studied decision to be attending my alma mater, Duke University, next year. So obviously you're going in the right direction. In our meeting, and thank you for coming to our office, we discussed, and this is, the position that you're up for is so important to all of us because it helps us interact with all of our constituents. We get a lot of constituent issues around transportation issues, small ones and large. And as you know, in West Virginia, we have Corridor H, which is the last section of the Appalachian Development Highway System that needs to be completed. Because of the way we have treated the Appalachian Highway Development System, it's now funded out of the Highway Trust Fund. And I just wanted a commitment from you, we talked about it, that you would move forward with me to try to find the easiest and best way, most efficient way to complete that Corridor H part of that system.
Yes, Senator, of course, I know how passionate you are about this, and I would be pleased to work with you.
Thank you, thank you. Another issue we talked about, too, by the way, Secretary Chow's fantastic, as you know, and you have a great leader. You will have a great leader at that department. But the one question I get a lot is, can you do an infrastructure package outside of the highway bill, a bipartisan infrastructure package? I think all of us would like to do it, but there's a whole lot of deep questions. One of the questions was the funding issue when it came forward over the last Congress. And one of the things that the administration asked for was skin in the game. What private monies can be acquired or what kind of state dollars. And I would just like to tout my own state of West Virginia, who passed a $1.5 billion bond and it was called, the campaign, not by the governor, but by others, was called FTDR, Fix the Roads. Because people are very passionate about the safety aspects and are on the roads in rural areas all the time. So as we're thinking about this, it was obvious that we were going to be able to use that new state share as part of our match. So I want to put that in your head as you move forward, that any proposal, I think, has to look at what the states are willing to do and what kind of skin in the game the states are willing to have, and hopefully we can elongate that timeline a little bit to go back into the past to scoop up some of these projects like our state that moved forward with that. So I'd like to ask you if we could work together on that as we're developing hopefully an infrastructure package, but also the highway bill as well.
Yes, of course, Senator. I would be pleased to work with you
Great.
and your staff.
Thank you. Other question, both senators have talked about streamlining in the permitting process. Right. One of the things that, as we see states, particularly rural states, falling behind in the deployment of rural broadband, one of the ways that I think we feel passionate that we're able to kind of make it more affordable is a dig once kind of proposition, working with the Department of Transportation where you can use, we were on a bill last year, Senator Hatch had a bill, the Highway Right-of-Way Permitting Efficiency Acts. We can work with the Department of Transportation, with the FCC, with the states, broadband councils and others, to be able, while you're digging and while you're improving a highway, either new or maintaining, you can also use that as a way to run the high-efficiency broadband into these rural areas that, if left to their own devices, is extremely expensive. I don't know if this is something that you've actually thought about. I know it's probably premature, but do you have any thoughts on that?
Senator, I appreciate the question because we do spend time at the State Department talking about 5G.
Right.
As you know, it's not just 3G plus 2.
Right.
I mean, it's a game changer. And so I think there may be interesting opportunities to save time and money for states, and I would be happy to work with you on this if I'm confirmed.
Yeah, it just seems as though we get in our own way on something like this that's really not controversial. It's not controversial. And actually, I ran into a federal highway project that actually did provide the channel for the high-speed internet, although there's the cabling and everything, but there was nothing in there. But it was prepared for it, so when and if, it's already ready, and it saves a lot of money. In terms of the safety issues, you mentioned pedestrian and cyclist safety. How do you mentioned congestions at intersections. I've read of several stories here in D.C. of some very tragic outcomes of pedestrian safety. Do you have any thoughts on, is it educating the American public? Is it making the signaling better? Is it the driver, or is it all the above? What perspectives you might have on that?
Senator Capito, thank you. I think it is all of the above. NHTSA, we always talk about the E's, right? We need to educate, we need to enforce, but we also need to engineer better. And so that is a piece where I think Federal Highways could provide some very valuable information and data, and it would be something that I could work with my colleagues at NHTSA and in the department to see what improvements we could make.
Yeah, I would really encourage you there because, I mean, that to me is just so preventable. Yep. And it results in tragedies. Thank you. Good luck. I plan on supporting you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good luck at Duke.
Thank you, Senator Capito. Senator Cardin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Nassen, thank you. And thank you for your willingness to serve. And we thank your family because this is a family sacrifice. So thank you all very much for sharing your loved one with the government. We appreciate it. And to Norm Mineta, it's great to see you. I had the opportunity to serve with Congressman Mineta, see his talent as chairman of our committee, know his reputation as mayor of San Jose, and really a mentor to many of us that are serving today. So, Norm, thank you for your extraordinary leadership. And you have a really good person introducing you. That was a smart decision you made, just let you know that.
My secret weapon.
Yes, it was the right thing to do. I just really want to underscore what the chairman said about this committee being able to work in a bipartisan manner to produce a strong bill. We did that with water, and we want to do that with the reauthorization of surface transportation and perhaps other infrastructure bills. But we're going to need your help because, as you said, you wanted predictable funding for transportation. I think this committee would like to make sure that we have long-term predictability. So the longer term the reauthorization, the better it is for local governments that depend upon projects that go for multiple years to have the federal partnership understood. And it's got to be adequate funding. That's going to be the real challenge. And there are Democrats and Republicans want to work together, and we want to come up with a bipartisan plan, but it's going to take your work with us in order to give us a path forward so we can accomplish those goals. Are you ready for that?
I am ready for those
interesting
conversations.
I thank you for it. I want to follow up on Senator Capito's point and your point on bicycle and pedestrian safety, because we do have a program under the FAST Act that helps the TAP program, the Transportation Alternative Program, which are funds that go to the local governments, the county governments, so that they can plan in their community to try to protect pedestrians and bicyclists by using a small amount of money for paths and trails and those type of issues. This is a bipartisan commitment to establish that program. And as we work towards the reauthorization, will you work with us to see whether we could perhaps strengthen that program so that we can reduce them? We have a growing number of fatalities with bicyclists and pedestrians, so we can work to try to deal with that using the existing tool of the Transportation Alternative Programs, perhaps enhancing that?
Yes, Senator Cardin, if I am confirmed as Federal Highway Administrator, I would very much like to work with you and your staff to see what enhancements we can make to already existing programs.
Well, I appreciate that. I think this is a program that does work. The challenge, of course, is it's a little bit unusual because, first of all, the money goes directly to the local government, bypasses the states, which they don't always like. And secondly, of course, it is for the local enhancements, which at times gets lost as we look at the challenges we have. I want to underscore the point that Senator Carper made in regards to climate change and resiliency. It is a major challenge we have. It's a major challenge in maintaining our existing transportation infrastructure as we look for new, but it also recognizes we got to do things in a smarter way in order for investments, public investments, to have its maximum advantage. Are you prepared to work with us based upon what science is telling us so that our infrastructure investments are done in the best way, recognizing that these extreme weather conditions are becoming more frequent?
Yes, Senator, I think Federal Highways could be a center of excellence for a collection of good data and research, and I would be pleased to work with you if I'm confirmed.
And I want to talk about the multimodal concepts here. Took me shade under 2 hours to get here today from Baltimore. That's a good time. It usually takes me longer than that to get a commute that should be 45 minutes. It usually takes me about 2 hours and 15 minutes. I think it was the weather forecast that kept some people off the roads today, so I made it a little bit faster. But we live in the worst congested area in the country. So we really need to invest in multimodal. We got to get people out of cars into transit. We need to deal with the issues of the commuter rails. We have to deal with all of the above. Are you prepared to use your leadership, if confirmed, so that we have a sensible multimodal transportation commitment to be as friendly as we can to reduce congestion in the most environmentally friendly way?
Yes, Senator. People's transportation needs are diverse, and there are a lot of factors that go into choosing how you get from one place to another, from time to cost, and so I would be happy to work with you on those issues if I'm confirmed.
I appreciate that, and I look forward to working with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Cardin. Senator Brown.
Thank you. Pleasure meeting you the other day. I'm from Indiana, and we've done a lot to kind of address infrastructure needs, and it really, you got to look forward. It's a very capital-intensive thing. Our current budget, in the condition it's in, where interest is dominating a big portion of it, but mostly when it comes to the fact that we seem to be the least capable of taking on a big project like infrastructure across the country, just like we were in Indiana, to keep maintenance in line and actually do new stuff. Do you think it's realistic to maintain an 80-20 traditional funding rule to really accomplish, what the nation's needs would be?
Thank you, Senator. As you and I discussed, Indiana's made some strong choices regarding investment. And the question of both match and how we're going to finance the next legislative proposal, whatever it is that this committee chooses to do, is one that I don't think FHWA should dictate, but be part of the conversations, because as you note, what works in Indiana does not work in New York. And so I would be happy to work with you as we move forward on legislation to see whether we have the right balance.
Thank you. My personal opinion is we're going to have to come up with something new. Okay. In Indiana, we were creative. We did what was called a community crossings program, and that was to challenge counties and cities to actually put skin in the game. Of course, they universally complained about it in its formulation, indicated that that was a state's responsibility. All I can tell you, it's been an overwhelming success. Do you think that states that put more of their own skin in the game should receive some type of priority when it comes to federal funds that are going to be increasingly scarce?
Well, I do think that states who've demonstrated leadership are states that we can work closely with and learn from, learn how they were able to message and what their success was. And certainly a state like Indiana. And I would be happy to work with you on whatever changes this committee decides to make in the next legislation.
And I'd like to ask you to give some thought to how you think a similar dynamic might work, because it's my opinion that if we're going to address infrastructure needs, it's going to take something different, from what we've had leading up to this point. In general, on infrastructure, it's not only a condition of maintenance, but there's so many new things that need to be done. In your opinion, when it comes to maintenance of roads and bridges, where do you think it's really at on the federal landscape? I can tell you when we looked at it in Indiana, and this was probably back in 2015, almost 0.5% of our roads and bridges were headed into the wrong direction. And until we basically doubled our stream of funding, we were going to let that trajectory continue. So how are you sizing up the federal picture? Is it similar to what we saw in Indiana, or do you think maintenance is less of an issue and new construction might be the bigger challenge?
Well, I do think they're both important, but I think maintenance is particularly critical. And it's a place where Federal Highways can be very supportive and provide good information. They do conditions and performances reports, for example, annually on state of our bridges across the country. So not just on a state by state, but how we're looking nationwide and where and how we need to invest. And I think that if confirmed, Federal Highways has a lot of good information that we can share with senators.
Very good. And in summary of everything that we talked about there, please give thought and focus on how we get enterprising, responsible states to maybe have some preference when it comes to engaging in, if they're willing to put more skin in the game, that they should maybe get more of the scarce federal dollars. Thank you. And I yield.
Thank you very much, Senator Braun. Senator Whitehouse.
Thank you, Chairman. Welcome, Assistant Secretary Nissen. I'm glad to have you here. Secretary Chow appeared before this committee in May of 2017, and when she did, I asked her how sea level rise is affecting our coastal infrastructure. As you and I discussed in my office, Rhode Island has 400 miles of coast, and the measured sea level rise is a very serious and significant issue for us. The Secretary agreed to look into the issue, and I followed up with a letter to her that I would ask to be made a part of the record of the hearing.
Without objection.
Before receiving the Secretary's formal response, we managed to get our hands on the draft response, the letter that the career staff sent up to the Secretary's office for her final approval. And then shortly after that, we got the letter from the Secretary's office. When you compare the two letters, you see some pretty significant notable differences, which I have redlined here. One is that the phrase sea level rise here is struck out of the career letter, and the word rise is replaced with variations. The term variations implies wrongly that the sea level rise that we're seeing now in Rhode Island is consistent with natural changes over, geologic time, when in fact, the current rise in sea levels is a direct consequence of human activity, of carbon pollution, and it's occurring at rates that humankind hasn't seen in thousands and thousands of years. And we actually measure this stuff at Naval Station Newport. So there's that change. Then down here, the political staff, presumably in the Secretary's office, struck out environmental conditions such as extreme weather events and climate change. Well, we live in Rhode Island in a world of extreme weather events and climate change, and I think we all do. So what worries me about this is that it looks like we're seeing political censoring for ideological purposes. And I think that the climate denial and the censoring and the nonsense has got to stop. We may have disagreements about what to do about climate change. We ought to be having a bipartisan discussion about solutions. But this business of just striking it out of letters so that it doesn't even come up and we're not even allowed to talk about it is ridiculous. So it forces me to ask you your assurance that you will not censor and ignore the facts and the science in the manner in which you go about your duties as the Federal Highway Administrator.
Yes, thank you, Senator Whitehouse. I'm unfamiliar.
Watch all of yesterday's hearing online, cspan.org. Just search Highway. We're leaving this now as the U.S. Senate is gaveling in next to continue work on a Middle East security bill, which makes changes to U.S. defense and security assistance in the Middle East. Senators will debate an amendment offered by Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell disapproving of the withdrawal of U.S. forces from Syria and Afghanistan. Live coverage now of the U.S. Senate on C-SPAN 2.
The Senate will come to order. The prayer will be offered by Dr. Black, Chaplain of the Senate.
Let us pray. Our Father in heaven, you are our shield and deliverer. You, O God, are our light and salvation, so we refuse to be afraid. Continue to be the strength of our lives as we remember the many times you have protected and preserved America in the past. Lord, inspire our lawmakers with your presence so that the words of their mouths and the meditations of their hearts will be acceptable to you. Help them to remember that you are an ever-present help for turbulent times, eager to empower those who depend upon your might. We pray in your strong name. Amen.
Amen. Join me in the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Senate Majority Leader.
As I've discussed several times, the Strengthening America's Security in the Middle East Act is a consequential legislative package that would strengthen vital partnerships and reaffirm our active role in matters of global concern. I'm proud to support it. I was also proud to lay down an amendment yesterday that would allow the Senate to speak equally forcefully on critical subjects in American foreign policy. The United States is engaged in Syria and Afghanistan for one simple reason: because our enemies are engaged there. Real dangers to us and to our allies still remain in both these nations, so we must continue to confront them there. Fortunately, we're not alone. We're joined in the counter-ISIS coalition by 78 other partners. And in both Syria and Afghanistan, local fighters are bearing the brunt of the work. But American leadership is absolutely essential. And that's what this amendment is all about. My amendment is not partisan. It expresses views and concerns from senators on both sides of the aisle, and it certainly isn't political. I intended it as an opportunity for the Senate to debate and vote on some of the more consequential matters of the day, and I expected this institution to rise to the occasion. I was a senator on September the 11th, 2001. I don't want America to ever live through another day like that. None of us do. I've also been here in the Senate for the 17 years since. 17 years of American engagement in worldwide efforts to combat terrorism. It hadn't been easy navigating American interests through this complicated and troubled region. It hasn't been easy adapting to an entirely new way of warfare against enemies that have proven adaptive themselves. It's understandable that as we get farther from September the 11th, many would grow tired of our military efforts a long way from home. But as decisions from the Obama administration have made painfully clear, leaving too abruptly carries its own grave risk. Had President Obama known that ISIS would emerge in the wake of his withdrawal from Iraq and flourish in the chaos of the Syrian civil war, I suspect he might have done things differently. Perhaps he would not have abandoned Iraq so precipitously, ignored the growing terror threats in Syria, or allowed Assad to steamroll over his now infamous red line. So we can't undo this unfortunate history, but we certainly cannot afford to repeat it. So, it has been a welcome contrast to see the Trump administration make huge progress, reinvigorating our fight against al-Qaeda in Afghanistan and ISIS in Syria. Unshackling our military has led to progress on the ground, greater pressure placed on the terrorists, and new opportunities for diplomatic and political solutions that have opened up as a result of the pressure that we applied. So what we must remember, Mr. President, is how hard-won these gains have been. Our response to this progress must not be to take our foot off the gas pedal, but rather to keep up those strategies that are clearly working. Our partnership with Iraqi security forces and the Syrian Democratic Forces have stripped ISIS of much territory in those two nations. But we've not yet defeated ISIS. We have not yet defeated al-Qaeda in Afghanistan. Civil wars continue to rage in both Iraq and Afghanistan. There are still cauldrons of sectarianism, extremism, and terror. President Trump is right that this cannot be America's fight alone. The threats that ISIS and al-Qaeda pose are global. That's why many countries are with us in this fight. There is more those partners can and should do to keep up direct pressure on terrorists and on outside actors who interfere with diplomatic efforts to resolve these wars. Putin's Russia and the Ayatollahs in Tehran need to pay a real price for their attempts to back butchers like the Assad regime, Hezbollah, and the Taliban. We also need to understand that if we withdraw too soon, we will create vacuums in Syria and Afghanistan. We know from experience that Russia and Iran would be only too happy to fill those vacuums. If we truly care about containing Russia, the battleground is not only on Twitter or Facebook, but also in the world of old-fashioned geopolitics. So my amendment would offer senators the opportunity to speak on all these subjects. I honestly did not expect this would be controversial stuff. I didn't expect that my colleagues across the aisle would make a partisan stand and try to block this straightforward sense of the Senate amendment when it really just restates what most of us thought was a broad bipartisan consensus about American leadership in the world. But that's what our Democratic colleagues did. They tried to block it. Democrats objected to a vote on this amendment apparently because it would expose a rift among their own membership, a division between those Senate Democrats who still subscribe to the vision for America's leadership and their colleagues who have abandoned those principles at the urging of the very far left or are too afraid to take either position, either one. It's quite the split, Mr. President. It shows how caught up my Democratic colleagues are in the partisanship of the moment. My amendment simply reemphasizes the expertise and counsel offered by experts who have served presidents of both parties. It's a mainstream amendment with 19 co-sponsors, but apparently a significant portion of today's Democratic Party isn't sure they believe in these principles anymore. They'd rather try to squash the debate and dodge the vote altogether. Well, that's not going to work. These are exactly the kind of issues the Senate should be debating. The Senate has a special role in foreign policy. Americans are serving in harm's way in Syria and Afghanistan. The American service members, diplomats, and aid workers in those conflict zones all deserve to know whether their elected officials support their efforts or whether we no longer believe their tireless efforts serve our national interests. Our constituents deserve to know which senators welcome a thorough debate over Syria and Afghanistan and which are simply trying to duck the debate. Well, despite my Democratic colleagues' attempt, I can assure the American people they're going to learn precisely that. I filed cloture on the amendment yesterday afternoon, and we'll vote on it. Regardless of whatever political contortions the far left may be demanding from Senate Democrats, the American people are going to learn exactly where their senators stand. Our institution will not shrink from this important duty. Now, Mr. President, on an entirely different matter, I spoke for the first time yesterday on the subject that House Democrats have crowned their signature effort for this Congress, H.R. 1, also known as the Democratic Politician Protection Act. Speaker Pelosi and her colleagues are advertising it as a package of urgent measures to save American democracy. What it really seems to be is a package of urgent measures to rewrite the rules of American politics for the exclusive benefit of the Democratic Party. Yesterday, I gave a brief tour through several of the most bizarre components of their proposal. Today, I'd like to focus on just one of the legislation's major victims, the American taxpayer. H.R. 1 would victimize every American taxpayer by pouring their money into expensive new subsidies that don't even pass the laugh test. In several new ways, it would put every taxpayer on the hook to line the pockets of candidates, campaigns, and outside consultants. Do you look forward to bumper stickers, robocalls, attack ads, and campaign mail that descend on the country in seemingly endless cycles? Speaker Pelosi must think you do, because she wants you to pay for these things with your tax dollars. You get the opportunity. with your money to pay for attack ads and bumper stickers and the rest. This bill creates brand new government subsidies both for political campaign donors and for the campaigns themselves. The federal government would start matching political donations the same way some employers match gifts to charity. You'd be literally funding attack ads for the candidates you disagree with. How about that? Your money funding ads for the candidates you disagree with. Maybe that's why every Democrat opposed our tax cuts for middle-class families and small businesses. They were counting on that money to pull off this stimulus package, if you will, for campaign consultants. And for what reason? To increase competition? Well, studies have shown that incumbents win just as often in taxpayer-funded elections as they do when campaigns are funded with private money. To reduce corruption? Hardly. Jurisdictions that have toyed with taxpayer-funding political systems have turned out to be replete with misappropriation, personal use, straw donors, and public corruption scandals. So I remain curious why exactly the Democratic Political Protection Act wants to offer the American people's money to thousands of candidates that run for the House of Representatives every 2 years, whether they support these candidates or not. They want citizens to bankroll political materials that they totally disagree with. But they aren't stopping there, Mr. President. Democrats also want taxpayers on the hook for generous new benefits for federal bureaucrats and government employees. Their bill would make Election Day a new paid holiday for government workers and created an additional brand new paid leave benefit for up to 6 days for any federal bureaucrat who decides they'd like to hang out at the polls during any election. Just what America needs, another paid holiday and a bunch of government workers being paid to go out and work. I assume our colleagues on the other side, on their campaigns. This is the Democrat plan to restore democracy? A brand new week of paid vacation for every federal employee who'd like to hover around while you cast your ballot? A Washington-based taxpayer-subsidized clearinghouse for political campaign funding? A power grab that's smelling more and more like exactly what it is.
Under the previous order, the leadership time is reserved. Morning business is closed. Under the previous order, the Senate will resume consideration of S1, which the clerk will report.
Calendar number 1, S1, a bill to make improvements to certain defense and security assistance provisions and to authorize the appropriation of funds to Israel and so forth and for other purposes.
Mr. President.
Senator from Texas.
Mr. President, I appreciate the fact that the Majority Leader has put up before the Senate an important piece of legislation that re-emphasizes our support for our allies in the Middle East, a very dangerous neighborhood that has a tendency to draw others into that neighborhood and into the fight. This legislation is comprised of 4 bills that have enjoyed bipartisan support, but we weren't able to get them done before the deadline at the end of the 115th Congress. But each of these 4 bills speak directly to our national security interests in the Middle East and the support for our allies, particularly allies like Jordan and Israel. Every day, the state of Israel faces attacks from adversaries in the region, ranging from rocket and missile attacks to various explosives and foot soldiers, namely Hezbollah, the Iranian-financed and trained effort to try to exterminate the Jewish state. But Israel is also enduring a different type of warfare, this time an economic war, known as boycott, divestment, and sanctions, or the BDS movement. This campaign began in 2005 with more than
170 Palestinian non-governmental organizations lobbying foreign governments and corporations and academic institutions to sever all their ties with Israel. In the years since, this movement has expanded, with participants seeking to isolate Israel both economically and politically. For some, their participation in the movement is simply a means of voicing their opposition to Israeli policies in the Middle East, something that, at least in the United States, they have every right to do under the First Amendment. For others, though, it's part of a strategy to isolate Israel politically and economically, either to delegitimize the state or to force it to redraw its maps. State-sponsored BDS is incredibly harmful. We've seen support for BDS in capitals across Europe and, sadly, even in the United Nations, where the movement has been supported by countries with questionable humanitarian records like China, Russia, and Venezuela. A few years ago, the UN Human Rights Council called for the creation of a so-called blacklist, naming companies that do business with Israel. Then, in a report in January, the UN Human Rights Council laid the groundwork for utilizing those databases to boycott those businesses, including at least 22 American companies. It's shameful, really, that the UN has chosen to fuel this movement by encouraging countries to boycott these businesses for what they claim are illegal activities, even though that argument has absolutely no bearing on either the U.S. or Israel. This effort to choke off Israel's economy by ending business ties with other countries could have serious impacts. And we want to make sure that state and local governments have the flexibility to avoid business with entities that support the BDS movement if they wish. One of the bills included in the legislation we are considering is called Combating BDS Act, led by our colleagues Senator Rubio and Senator Manchin. Before I talk about what the bill does, I want to talk about what it does not do. Nothing in this bill restricts constitutionally protected speech. The law only impacts commerce-related or investment-related activities in the course of interstate or international commerce. The law does not punish companies for expressing their opposition to Israel or its policies or engaging in anti-Israel boycotts, for example. What this legislation does do, however, is to clarify that state and local governments have every right to counter boycotts of Israel without fear that they are somehow violating federal law. It assures those local governments and state governments that if they decide not to issue contracts or otherwise do business with entities that are boycotting or divesting from Israel, they have every legal right to do so. This is not a new concept, as 34 states have already enacted legislation to combat BDS. In 2017, Texas became the 18th state to pass legislation preventing tax dollars from being used to support the boycott of Israel. When Governor Abbott signed that bill into law, he said at the time, quote, "Anti-Israel policies are anti-Texas policies, and we will not tolerate such actions against an important ally," close quote. I agree with his sentiments, certainly. And I believe it's time to provide all 50 states with the flexibility to make this decision to forego any business that would harm the Jewish state. It goes without saying, but perhaps we should reiterate it. Israel is an important and valuable friend and ally to the United States. It is one of the main stabilizing influences in the Middle East, an admittedly dangerous neighborhood with aggressors on all sides wanting to literally wipe the state of Israel off the map. Of course, Israel is the only democracy in the Middle East. Ensuring its viability is critical to protecting U.S. interests abroad and here at home, and it's important that we support our closest ally in the region. Passing this legislation is a step to support Israel and their efforts to promote democracy in the Middle East. And it takes a strong stance against the anti-Israel and anti-Semitic BDS movement and confirm our longstanding support of Israel. So, Mr. President, I look forward to voting yes on this important legislation when the time comes, hopefully very soon. I would note the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
On the floor of the Senate, they continue work on the Middle East security bill, which also provides additional sanctions on Syria and military assistance, security assistance to Israel, and an amendment by the Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, which would disapprove of the withdrawal of U.S. forces from Syria and Afghanistan, an amendment which would likely get a vote on Thursday in the Senate. They're in a quorum call now. Over in the House, they've wrapped up work debate anyway on a measure that would increase the salaries of civilian federal employees by 2.6%. And they're debating a measure now, a sense of the House resolution condemning government shutdowns, a Democratic resolution from Jennifer Wexton of Virginia. Follow the House. Votes coming up soon, and that's over on C-SPAN. As this quorum call continues, we'll show you a conversation from this morning's Washington Journal on the economic impact of the government shutdown.
Our first guest of the morning is Representative Bill Johnson, Republican of Ohio. He serves on the Budget Committee, also serves as a member of the Energy and Commerce Committee. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
Is there a legislative way to keep shutdowns from happening? There are proposals, perhaps, that if there's no authorization or money available, it should go dumped right to a CR. Would you agree with that kind of prospect?
CRs are terrible. It's tough for our military because they have contracts that expire. It increases cost over the long run, and it deters their ability to do their job. So I'm not a big fan of CRs. I know that's how we've been operating. The responsible thing to do is to do what Congress is supposed to do, which is pass a budget, pass the appropriations bills, and fund the government. That's the responsible thing to do.
Do you have a sense from House Democrats on how they go about that process of getting budgets done? And is this something that you can sign on to as far as that process and the ability to complete that process?
We'll see what the process is. I really don't know how they're going to manage the process. I know over the last 8 years, we have been very, very conciliatory. We've had a very congenial conversation with Democrats where budgets are concerned. We've passed a lot of most of our appropriations bills on a bipartisan basis. The problem resides over in the Senate, where we can't get those bills through over there. So obviously we've got some work to do, but shutting down the federal government is not the right answer.
When it comes to budgets and priorities, what do you have? Do you have a sense of House Democrats what their priorities are going to be in passing budgets, and how does that differ from how Republicans did that?
I don't know. I can tell you that I'm concerned about some of their proposals. I mean, if you look at the current level of spending, we just had our CBO baseline hearing yesterday. Clearly, we've still got a spending problem in Washington, D.C. Our debt is rising not because the American people are taxed too little. Our debt is rising because Washington spends too much. And if you look at what's going to happen over the next 10 to 20 years, by 2029, our debt is going to reach 93% of GDP under current law. By 2049, it's going to spike up to 150% of GDP. Remember, only after World War II did we get to 106% of GDP, and that was in the middle of a world crisis, right? So I'm concerned, and if you add on top of that the many spending programs that the Democrats have said that they're going to be offering, you're looking at another $50 trillion in debt that we simply cannot afford. So I'm very concerned about that. We'll see what happens through the process, but we've got some work to do.
One of those things being floated in the last couple of days, Medicare for all, even John Yarmuth, the head of Ways and Means, saying that's possibly a consideration or at least something to talk about. When you hear that kind of conversation, what goes through your mind as a budget person?
Look, Medicare and Social Security, those are safety net programs and obligations that the federal government has made to the American people. My mother, when I was first elected, the first thing she said to me was not congratulations. It was, you better make sure that my Medicare and Social Security is protected because otherwise I'm coming to live with you. My wife said, you better do what your mom said. So we had a clear understanding. I believe that current seniors and those that live within that retirement window that can't change their retirement plans, the government needs to keep the promises that they made. However, our largest driver, the biggest driver of our national debt, are health care costs. we cannot afford Medicare for all. I just mentioned the $50 trillion in additional programs. 30 of that $50 trillion increase would be coming from Medicare for all. It is just not something that America can support.
Our guest with us until 8:30, Representative Bill Johnson, a Republican from Ohio. If you want to ask him questions, you can call us 202-748-8000 for Democrats, 202-748-8001 for Republicans. Independents, 202-748-8002. Again, as a budget guy, when you heard the CBO say that the United States lost $3 billion over the shutdown, what goes through your mind?
You know, nobody wanted the shutdown. I didn't want the shutdown. I voted last year before we went home for Christmas to fund the federal government, and I was really disappointed that we couldn't get cooperation over in the Senate to get that passed. Shutting down the federal government is not the right way to do business. It always costs more to open it up, and it sends a bad signal to the rest of the world. You know, that America can't manage its financial responsibilities, and I don't like that.
There's negotiations starting today. The committee starts its work on trying to come up with some type of package that could meet the president's approval. What's your level of confidence in that process?
Level of confidence, that's difficult to say, but at least it's a step in the right direction. You know, you got to have two willing participants at the table to negotiate. The president has thrown out an olive branch by opening the federal government back up and bringing both parties to the table to address the issues of border security and opening up the federal government.
Mr. President. Senator from Kansas.
Mr. President.
Senate's currently in a quorum call.
I would ask, Mr. President, that the quorum call be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr.
Senator
President.
from Kansas.
Mr. President, I rise today to speak about an important piece of legislation I've just filed, aptly named after the young Kansan whose life and bright future was cut short by a senseless act of violence, and whose case now is the inspiration for why we desperately need to update the law. 12 years ago, on June 2, 2007, 18-year-old Kelsey Smith was abducted in broad daylight from an Overland Park, Kansas parking lot. Kelsey's abduction was captured on the store's closed circuit security camera. That left little doubt of the emergency nature of the situation. This was an emergency. Here's the tragedy. Mr. President, 4 days after Kelsey disappeared, 4 days, authorities were able to locate her body after a wireless provider finally released the call information from her cell phone. 4 critical days. Providing location information as fast as possible, Mr. President, is absolutely critical to ensure law enforcement officials can rescue victims in imminent danger of death or serious physical harm and hopefully prevent future fates similar to that of Kelsey's. This legislation is the culmination of years of work between legislatures at both the federal and state level, including industry stakeholders, privacy advocates, and most importantly, Kelsey's brave parents, who spearheaded this initiative and have advocated to create common sense reforms that properly balance the needs of law enforcement and with Fourth Amendment protection of all of our citizens. Through their advocacies and tireless efforts, Missy and Greg Smith have helped enact laws, oftentimes with unanimous support, in 23 states, including my home state of Kansas. This law provides law enforcement with the necessary tools to rescue individuals in emergency situations where the threat of death or serious bodily injury is imminent. And the impact of this law at the state level has been real and measurable. For example, in May 2012, 1 month after the enactment of its state's version
of the Kelsey Smith Act, local authorities in Tennessee were successful in saving the life of a child who had been abducted by a suspected child rapist. Because the child was believed to be in imminent danger, then police were able to successfully receive the location of the suspect's cell phone in the window of time that led to the safe recovery of the child alive and before she was assaulted. In February of 2015, Kelsey's Law helped save the life of a 5-month-old Lenexa, Kansas girl when a car with a baby in the back seat was stolen from its mother. And through Kelsey's Law, police were able to ping that mother's phone, which was left in the car, and within an hour, the baby was reunited with her parents. According to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, the first 3 hours are critical to recovering a child alive. That is why it is necessary that in these narrowly defined, isolated instances where a person's very life is at stake, an exemption should be made to allow wireless carriers to immediately ping an individual's phone and release to law enforcement the whereabouts of that individual. Understanding this, our legislation would provide law enforcement with the ability to recover the location of children, other missing individuals, in only very specific emergency situations, namely where there is risk of death or serious bodily injury. And just don't take it from Pat Roberts. Public safety professionals with experience in the field support this life-saving legislation. According to retired Johnson County Sheriff Frank Denning, pardon me, time is of the essence in these types of incidents, and the narrow exception for law enforcement to act immediacy is key here. For this not to be a federal law seems unjust to those who have loved ones in harm's way, and this type of intervention can and will save lives. Major Scott Bodden with the Johnson County Sheriff's Office in Kansas says, quote, "Over my 22-year law enforcement career with the Johnson County Sheriff's Office, 17 years have been spent in our dispatch 9/11 center. During that time, the Kelsey Smith Law has been the single most important piece of legislation related to potentially saving the lives of suicidal subjects, assisting endangered children, and addressing life threats when cell phone location is necessary, and seconds count. Seconds count. The difference this law has made cannot be overstated," he said, "and I look forward to the day it becomes available all across this country as a resource to assist first responders in their most critical service, saving lives." Jennifer Lanter, the 9/11 director for Loudoun County, Tennessee, says, "In Tennessee, we have the privilege of having Kelsey's Law enacted for several years. There are multiple examples of how this law has resulted in lives being saved that otherwise would have been lost. This law enables the men and women that have dedicated their lives to the protection of others to ensure they are able to do everything possible to locate someone that needs help. The benefits of this law being passed at the federal level will be far-reaching, and countless lives will be saved. And it's not just these individual law enforcement officials who support this bill. The bill is also supported by the National District Attorneys Association, the Federal Law Enforcement Officers Association, the Sergeants Benevolent Association, the International Association of Chiefs of Police, the Major County Sheriffs of America, the National Association of Police Organizations, the Fraternal Order of Police, and the National Sheriff's Association. I don't know of any law enforcement organization that's been left out, and if they are left out, why, they would certainly support the bill. CTIA, the Wireless Association, also supports this common sense legislation. And just this morning, Mr. President, I received a letter of support from John Walsh, co-founder of the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, and a well-known host of the television show America's Most Wanted. Mr. Walsh has dedicated his life to advocating for victims' rights, beginning with his fight for the passage of the Missing Children's Assistance Act following the abduction and subsequent murder of his son, Adam. Fortunately for my colleagues, voting for this bill won't take a blind leap of faith. Kelsey's law is already saving lives in states like Kansas, New Jersey, Nebraska, Minnesota, New Hampshire, North Dakota, Tennessee, Hawaii, Missouri, Utah, West Virginia, Colorado, Nevada, Rhode Island, Oregon, Pennsylvania, Arkansas, Iowa, Washington, Louisiana, Delaware, Indiana, Alabama. Yes, I wanted to repeat all 23. Oftentimes, approval by state legislatures has been unanimous. And that's because Kelsey's law strikes the appropriate balance between ensuring law enforcement has the tools they need to help individuals in grave danger, while also ensuring the proper checks are in place to guard against government overreach. My legislation requires all law enforcement agencies to maintain a record of all requests made under the Kelsey-Smith Act. This record will include the name of the officer requesting location information from a wireless carrier, a description of the request that explains the need for disclosure of location information, that's included, and a declaration that an individual's location information is needed in order to offer them life assistance during an emergency situation that again involves the risk of death or serious physical harm. And I want to stress that nothing, absolutely nothing, in the Kelsey-Smith Act prohibits wireless carriers from continuing to operate robust law enforcement verification systems, which they do use today to make absolutely certain that when a request is made, it is coming from an authorized law enforcement official. Kelsey was never given the opportunity to attend college or get married or have children and experience the American dream that many of us take for granted every day. But what she did do was inspire her mother and her father to make it their mission in life to help education and empower communities and children to help prevent another case like this from ever happening again. Kelsey's father, Greg, a former law enforcement officer himself and a Kansas state senator, said it best when he quoted President Abraham Lincoln to describe what Kelsey had accomplished. In the end, it's not the years in your life that counts, it's the life in your years. Mr. President, I thank my colleagues for the opportunity to speak on the floor today and to offer what I think is a common sense bill that will help prevent tragedies like Kelsey. I also want to thank Senator Moran, Senator Fisher, Senator Blunt for their strong support and co-sponsor of this bill. I welcome the President's support as well. And I ask every colleague in this body to consider one question. If it was your child, your grandchild, your spouse, would you not want law enforcement to have immediate access to information that could potentially save their life and to bring them home? Mr. President, let's honor Kelsey's memory by passing this legislation in the Congress. I see no reason why it could not go by unanimous consent. Thank you, Mr. President, and I yield the floor. Inspection, I note the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
Mr. President.
Senator from Missouri.
Mr. President, the
Senate's currently in a quorum call.
Move we suspend the quorum call.
Without objection.
Mr. President, the Senate's currently debating the Strengthen America's Security in the Middle East Act. These are issues that we need to deal with. It's really an important time to be talking about these issues. Really, there are 4 different things that this bill does, and the first thing this bill does is go further in providing security help for Israel. I think virtually everybody in the Senate, there may be an exception or two, but we understand that Israel is our greatest ally in the Middle East, that Israel is a great source of intelligence for us as we try to work our way through problems in the Middle East, and that we rely on Israel for the partnership we have there, the things that Israel has done to study and test, and unfortunately get to test in real situations, military defense systems that will intercept things that are coming at us, the whole concept of a bullet that can hit a bullet that some people thought was such a far-fetched idea when President Reagan talked about it in the 1980s. Israel's proved you could do it with our help and in some of the technology. It's a partnership. They unfortunately are a place where they actually use it to really intercept things that are coming at their citizens, and we've found out it works. Security for Israel is security for the United States. 2016, the United States and Israel signed a 10-year agreement on security assistance. This bill makes sure that that bill will continue to have, that agreement will continue to have the full force of law. This legislation makes sure that we're giving some concrete aid to help Israel protect itself and to protect its own security. It also states very clearly that the policy of the United States is to ensure that Israel can counter and defeat threats when it's facing its enemies. These are countries and other groups who don't like Israel. They, in their schools, their propaganda, their commitment as a nation, talk about the importance of Israel not existing. In fact, some of them use maps where Israel doesn't exist. That if you looked at the education of some of Israel's neighbors, the educational structure, you'd have to find something outside what you learn in school to understand that there even is an Israel. And of course, there's Iran, there's Hezbollah, there's Hamas. There are plenty of threats to Israel and what Israel and the United States stand for. This part of the bill has previously passed both houses of the Congress in slightly different forms. Now it's time for both houses to pass it in the same form, put it on the president's desk, and extend the things it extends, further defend and define the things that are there. This is an important thing to do. The second part of the bill extends our cooperation between us and Jordan. We have no more faithful partner outside of Israel than Jordan. And Jordan, frankly, that Israeli-Jordan border, critically important in how it works. We saw what happened as Syrians looked for a safe place to go. They went to Israel. They went to Jordan, rather, and we've done our best to try to ensure that Jordan can meet its humanitarian crisis based on what's happened in Syria. But the economic stability of the region, the economic stability of Jordan, believe me, is critical to the economic stability of the region. And so this bill also comes up with new ways to assist our allies when they face these unanticipated situations, and some of these situations last for a long time once they start. The third part of the legislation imposes sanctions on anyone doing business with the government of Syria. The tragedy of Syria, the tragedy of the Syrian people, the chemical warfare of Bashar Assad, the barrel bombs dropped in neighborhoods where where innocent people, where children, where senior citizens live, where people are trying to work every day, makes it clear that this is not a country that we should support. This portion of the legislation actually already passed the House by voice vote. We need to join them with their commitment to continue to put pressure on Syria for Syria to meet the standards that civilization should require of those we deal with. And so this says just can't deal with Syria as long as they continue to act in the way they've been acting. It's something we know needs to be done. Hopefully we'll have a vote that will move this further toward reality. The fourth part of the package we're talking about is another thing that we can do in our support of Israel. There is a group of people who are seeking to target Israel through a series of boycotts and disinvestments and sanctions. These are not usually government, they're individuals and institutions trying to harm Israel by boycotting any kind of business there. This anti-Israel activity is shameful. Those who promote it should be penalized. If they want to find out what it's like to not be able to trade, we should show them what it's like not to be able to trade. There are 26 states that have already passed legislation that allows them to deal in different ways with people who have either disinvested or boycotted Israel. This bill provides some further definition of how they can move forward. Boycotting Israel is unacceptable. That's an important part of this package. All of these things need to be done, and this is an important time to send that message around the world that not only our allies in the world can count on us, but our enemies in the world, our adversaries, can also expect us to do what we should do to support our allies, to defend freedom, to look forward, as one amendment that's been offered will do, that I've co-sponsored, to meet our commitments to NATO, to understand the continued dangerous nature of terrorist threats, to be thoughtful as we make decisions that move us further away from the safe havens that those threats have used in the past. This is an important time for us to send the very message that this bill and the proposed amendment do send. I look forward to seeing that message sent by first the Senate, then the House, and hopefully a signature from the President of the United States. And I would yield.
Mr. President.
Senator from Wyoming.
Well, thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, first I'd like to associate the remarks we just heard from the distinguished senator from Missouri, who makes the wonderful points about how important the bill that we're discussing on the floor continues to be. And I appreciate his remarks and his leadership of this body. But, Mr. President, I come to the floor to discuss a different topic, and that is the government is now reopened and is reopened for 3 weeks. It is welcome news that President Trump has signed the stopgap funding measure and he's fully paid furloughed federal workers. Mr. President, there's an important workforce story that I believe has been lost over the last couple of weeks during this shutdown, and it's a story about the great news about the American economy. I certainly feel it at home. I know you do, Mr. President, in Utah. Others do as we head home and see the help wanted signs up, people looking to hire more people. This economy, Mr. President, continues to fire on all cylinders. It's fueled certainly in part by what Republicans have been able to accomplish due to our policies, which is a pro-job policy. Tax cuts, regulatory relief, and since the tax cut law is signed a year ago, this economy has created 2.6 million American jobs in the last 1 year. But there's additional good news because Americans, and I hear it in Wyoming, heard it last weekend, expect to hear it this weekend, are seeing that there is actually more money in their paychecks. And there's more money for a couple of reasons. One is that the wages are up, and the other is that taxes are down. Wages are up. Last month, 3.2% year-over-year increase in average hourly wages. It's matched October as the biggest increase since 2009. This wage increase was even stronger for production workers and non-managers who saw an additional raise over year growth. So the economy is working well. It's producing more jobs. For 9 straight months now, there have been more available jobs in this country than individuals looking for work. Last week, we saw jobless claims drop to the lowest level since November of 1969. 69, the year that we put a man on the moon, the year of Woodstock, 50 years ago, lowest since then. It's a half a century. Well, now that this partial shutdown is over, we need to refocus, I believe, our attention on continuing to grow the economy, continue to increase wages, continue to create more high-paying jobs for American workers. Now, Democrats, meanwhile, they seem to want to put the brakes on the economy. They're proposing higher taxes and expansive new regulations. So we still have our work cut out for us. This excellent economic news underscores the need for us to work together to resolve our differences on important government funding legislation. So let's keep in mind that 70% of the government's already funded all the way through the end of the fiscal year. Congress still has the job to do of funding the remaining 25%, and we need to do that by the middle of February, by February 15th. So by signing the 3-week continuing resolution, the President has given Congress the opportunity to come together to secure the southern border and to fund the government. So during this shutdown standoff, Democrats repeatedly called for the President to reopen the government. They asked for 3 weeks so they could seriously negotiate, they say, on border security. Well, we now have a 3-week agreement. But time's going to tell whether Democrats are serious about solving this border security crisis and protecting the American people. A full-year spending deal has to include significant funding for a comprehensive border security package. We need more personnel, we need more technology, and we need more physical barriers. Security barriers are not the sole solution, but they are an essential part of the solution. That's why the last 4 presidents built 650 miles of physical barriers along our 2,000-mile border with Mexico. Democrats, including Speaker Pelosi, voted for all this construction. In fact, the Speaker's home state of California has a physical barrier on the border with Tijuana, Mexico. Like his 4 predecessors, President Trump has listened to the security experts. So that takes it into effect. President Obama, President Clinton, President George W. Bush, President George Herbert Walker Bush, 4 presidents prior to President Trump, listen to the experts. They say, the experts today say we need 200 more miles of physical barriers strategically located where illegal traffic is surging. Despite the experts' support, Democrats have abruptly changed their position on barriers, changed completely, and they have denied the President the funding that he has requested. Well, given that Democrats had supported 650 miles of the physical barriers that we currently have, why are they opposing the next 200 miles strategically placed where illegal traffic is surging? To me, it seems personal, and it seems aimed at President Trump. Look, the American people expect us to solve problems, not as Democrats and Republicans, but as elected representatives of the people. The priority is to move full-year Homeland Security Department spending legislation through Congress that provides wall funding. House Senate negotiators are working today to produce a compromise package that can pass with the other 6 bills and get it done by February 15th. This conference committee, this committee of the 2 houses will be meeting later today. Conferees also may add other provisions, including immigration reforms. Already, the President